I stood in the hallway outside my son's bedroom, my hand frozen on the doorknob. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors I had polished countless times over the years. 23 years in this house, and I had never felt like such a stranger in my own home. The conversation from last night still echoed in my mind. Michael's voice, so calm and measured, as if he were discussing the weather rather than asking me to give up the one space in this house that had always been mine, the guest room. Though calling it that had always felt like a lie. It was my sanctuary, my office, my retreat when the world became too much. I had raised Michael in that room during those early years when his father worked double shifts, and I juggled 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I had rocked him to sleep there during his colicky nights, read him bedtime stories curled up in the old armchair by the window. Later, when he was older and we had moved him to the larger bedroom down the hall, it became my workspace. My sewing machine occupied one corner, my desk another. Photo albums lined the shelves, chronicling our journey from a struggling young mother and her baby to the family we were today. But now, standing here in the early morning silence, I realized that the family I thought we were might have been nothing more than my own wishful thinking. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my thoughts. Michael appeared, already dressed in his pressed khakis and button-down shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. He moved with the confident stride of someone who had never questioned his place in the world, never wondered if he belonged. "Morning, Mom," he said, barely glancing in my direction as he headed toward the kitchen. "Jessica's making pancakes. You should join us." I followed him downstairs, my slippers silent on the carpet. The kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of vanilla and butter. Jessica stood at the stove, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her maternity dress hugging her 5-month belly. She looked up as we entered, her smile bright and practiced. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, her voice sweet as the syrup she was warming on the back burner. "I hope you're hungry." I made enough for an army. I forced a smile, taking my usual seat at the breakfast table. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear." Michael poured himself a cup of coffee, adding exactly 2 teaspoons of sugar, just as he had since he was 15. Some habits never change, I thought, watching him stir the liquid with mechanical precision. "We were thinking," Jessica began, sliding a plate of golden pancakes in front of me, "about maybe starting to look at paint colors for the nursery this weekend. Nothing too bold, of course. Maybe a soft yellow or mint green. Something gender neutral." I nodded, cutting into the pancakes with more force than necessary. "That sounds lovely." Michael cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with his wife. "About what we discussed yesterday, Mom. The guest room. We know it's an adjustment, but we really do need to start preparing for the baby. Jessica's doctor says everything looks good, and we want to have everything ready well before the due date." "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "I understand completely." But I didn't understand. Not really. This house had 4 bedrooms. Michael and Jessica occupied the master suite, which had been my room until they moved in 2 years ago. There was Michael's old room, which had become their home office, the guest room, which was hardly used for guests anymore, and the smallest bedroom, which had been converted into a storage space over the years. "We thought maybe you could use the small room upstairs," Jessica continued, her tone apologetic but firm. "It would just need a little cleaning out, and it would be perfect for you. More private, really." The small room, 8 by 10 feet, with a single window that faced the neighbor's fence. No closet, no built-in shelves. A room that had never been meant for living in, only for storing Christmas decorations and old furniture I couldn't bear to throw away. "That's very considerate of you both," I said, taking a sip of orange juice that suddenly tasted too acidic. "I'll start moving my things this weekend." Michael's relief was palpable. "Thanks, Mom. I know this isn't easy, but it means a lot to us. To Jessica especially. She's been stressed about getting everything ready." I looked at Jessica, who was rubbing her belly in slow, circular motions. She caught my eye and smiled, but there was something triumphant in her expression, something that made my chest tighten. "Well," I said, standing and carrying my barely touched plate to the sink, "I should get started on some errands. The grocery store gets busy later in the day." "Mom," Michael called as I headed toward the door. "Are you okay? You seem a little distant." I turned back, studying his face. My son, who had once run to me with every scraped knee and broken heart, who had called me his best friend well into his teenage years. When had he stopped seeing me as a person with feelings and needs of my own? "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, using the endearment that had once made him smile. "Just tired." The morning air was crisp as I walked to my car, the first hints of autumn coloring the leaves on the maple tree I had planted when Michael was 5. He had helped me dig the hole, his small hands dirty and determined. Now it towered over the house, its branches providing shade for the windows of what would soon be his child's nursery. I drove to the bank first, a decision I had made sometime during the sleepless hours of the previous night. The documents I needed were in my safety deposit box, along with the other papers that marked the important moments of my life. My marriage certificate, Michael's birth certificate, the divorce papers that had been finalized when he was 3. The bank was quiet, only a few customers conducting business at the teller windows. I waited in the small private room while the clerk retrieved my box, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. The deed to the house was on top, exactly where I had placed it 3 years ago after making the final payment. 20 years of mortgage payments, made entirely by me. 20 years of scrimping and saving, of choosing between new shoes for myself or school supplies for Michael. 20 years of building something that was supposed to be ours, but had always been mine in every way that mattered. I had been 19 when I bought the house, young and naive and desperate, to create a stable home for my baby. The mortgage payments had been a stretch even then, but I had made them work. Through 3 jobs and night classes, through Michael's childhood illnesses and my own moments of doubt, I had never missed a payment. The house was in my name alone. It had always been in my name alone. David, my ex-husband, had never contributed to the mortgage, never signed the papers. He had lived here for 3 years, but he had never owned any part of it. And when he left, taking nothing but his clothes and his guitar, I had been grateful for that small mercy. I made copies of the deed, along with the mortgage satisfaction letter and the property tax records. Evidence of ownership, clear and indisputable. Then I drove to the law office of Patricia Hendricks, a woman I had met at a book club 3 years earlier. She specialized in real estate law, and I trusted her to handle this matter with the discretion it required. "Margaret," Patricia said, rising from her desk as I entered her office. "What a pleasant surprise. How can I help you?" I explained the situation as objectively as I could, keeping my emotions in check. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You own the house outright," she said, more statement than question. "And your son and his wife are living there as your guests." "Yes. Have they been paying rent?" "No. They help with utilities and groceries sometimes, but there's no formal arrangement." Patricia nodded slowly. "And you want to formalize the arrangement. I want to establish clear boundaries," I said. "I want them to understand that this is my home, and while they're welcome to stay, it's not their right to dictate how I use my own space." "A lease agreement would accomplish that," Patricia said. "It would establish their status as tenants And your rights as the landlord. It would also protect all parties involved. We spent the next hour drafting a simple lease agreement. Fair market rent for a 3-bedroom house in our neighborhood, with utilities included, a security deposit, clear terms about the use of common areas, and the expectations for maintenance and upkeep. Are you prepared for their reaction? Patricia asked as I signed the documents. This might come as a shock to them. I'm prepared for whatever happens, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the neighborhood where I had lived for more than 2 decades. I knew every street, every house, every family that had come and gone over the years. I had watched children grow up, seen marriages begin and end, attended countless block parties and holiday gatherings. This was my community, my place in the world. And yet, somehow, I had allowed myself to become invisible, even here, in the place where I belonged most. The house was quiet when I returned. Michael's car was gone, and I assumed he and Jessica had gone out for their usual Saturday afternoon activities. Shopping, lunch with friends, maybe a movie. The life of a young couple with no real responsibilities, no concept of the sacrifices that had been made to provide them with their comfortable existence. I went upstairs to the guest room, my sanctuary, and sat on the bed that would soon be dismantled to make room for a crib. The room was bathed in afternoon sunlight, the walls covered with photos and memories of a life well lived. My college diploma hung next to a picture of Michael's high school graduation. My sewing projects were neatly organized in the closet, evidence of the creative life I had maintained despite everything. This room had been my refuge during Michael's difficult teenage years, when our relationship had been strained by his need for independence and my fear of letting him go. It had been my office during the years when I worked from home, building a small but successful bookkeeping business that had eventually allowed me to pay off the mortgage early. And now they wanted to erase all of that, to transform it into something else entirely, as if my presence here had never mattered at all. I opened the drawer of my bedside table and pulled out a small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother. Inside were the keys to the house, including the spare key I had given to Michael when he moved in. I had never asked for it back, never set boundaries about when and how it should be used. That would change now. I heard the front door open around 5 o'clock, followed by the sound of laughter and conversation. Michael and Jessica had returned, their arms full of shopping bags and their voices bright with the excitement of new purchases. "Mom!" Michael called from the bottom of the stairs. "Are you home?" "I'm up here," I called back, my voice calmer than I felt. They appeared in the doorway of the guest room, their faces flushed from the cool air outside. Jessica was carrying a small bag from the baby store, and Michael had a paint sample card in his hand. "We stopped by the hardware store," he said, holding up the card. "Look at these colors. What do you think of this one?" He pointed to a soft shade of green that reminded me of new spring leaves. "It's lovely," I said, meaning it. "Very peaceful." "We thought so too," Jessica said, settling onto the chair by the window. "We also picked up some ideas for the nursery furniture. There's a beautiful crib set that we're thinking about ordering." "That sounds wonderful," I said, standing and smoothing the wrinkles from my dress. "I'm sure it will be perfect." Michael studied my face with the intensity he had inherited from his father. "You're sure you're okay with this, Mom? You seem, I don't know, different today." I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my face. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just making some adjustments of my own." They left me alone then, going downstairs to start dinner. I could hear them moving around the kitchen, their voices a comfortable murmur that spoke of easy intimacy and shared purpose. Once I had been part of that kind of partnership. Once I had believed that Michael and I shared that kind of bond. But people change, and relationships evolve, and sometimes the person you thought you knew become someone else entirely, without you even realizing it. I spent the evening in my room, reading and listening to music, while Michael and Jessica watched television downstairs. Around 9 o'clock, I heard Jessica's voice on the phone with her mother, discussing baby names and nursery decorations with the kind of enthusiasm that made my heart ache. I had been that excited once, when Michael was on the way. I had spent hours planning his nursery, choosing colors and fabrics, imagining the life we would build together. I had been so young, so full of hope and determination. I had believed that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle, and in many ways, it had been. Michael had grown up healthy and happy, had excelled in school and made friends easily. He had gone to college on a partial scholarship, had found a good job, had married a woman who clearly adored him. By any measure, I had succeeded as a mother. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in the process. I had become so focused on being what Michael needed that I had forgotten what I needed, what I wanted, what I deserved. That ended now. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that made me grateful to be alive. I woke early, showered and dressed in my favorite blue sweater and a pair of jeans that still fit the way they had when I was 30. I made coffee and toast, then sat on the back porch to watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Michael and Jessica slept late, as they usually did on weekends. I could hear them moving around upstairs around 10 o'clock, their voices soft and intimate, in the way of couples who had just woken up together. I envied them that easy comfort, that assumption that they belonged exactly where they were. They came downstairs around 11, both of them looking refreshed and happy. Jessica was wearing one of Michael's old college t-shirts and a pair of maternity jeans, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Michael was in his weekend uniform of khakis and a polo shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. "Morning, Mom," he said, dropping a kiss on my cheek as he passed. "Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," I said, watching as he began his morning routine of coffee and newspaper. Jessica started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, humming softly to herself. "I thought I'd make French toast this morning," she said. "That recipe I found online last week. It looked delicious." "That sounds lovely," I said, though I had no intention of staying for breakfast. I waited until they were both settled at the kitchen table, their attention focused on the food and each other, before clearing my throat. "I have something I need to discuss with you both," I said, pulling the lease agreement from the folder where I had placed it the night before. Michael looked up from his newspaper, his expression curious. "What's up?" I placed the documents on the table between them, watching as their eyes scanned the official-looking papers. Michael's expression changed first, confusion giving way to something that looked like alarm. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. "It's a lease agreement," I said calmly, "for this house. I met with my attorney yesterday, and we drafted up a formal arrangement for your continued residence here." Jessica had gone very still, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "It's quite simple," I said, sitting down across from them. "This house belongs to me. I paid for it. I maintain it. And I make all the major decisions about it. You've been living here as my guests for 2 years, which has been wonderful. But I think it's time we formalized the arrangement." Michael's face had gone pale. "Mom, what are you talking about? This is our home. We live here. You live here, yes," I said. "But it's not your home. It's my home. And if you want to continue living here, you'll need to pay rent." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Normal sounds of a normal Sunday morning, while my world shifted on its axis. "This is about the guest room," Jessica said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're angry about the guest room. This is about respect." I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. This is about the fact that you both seem to have forgotten that I exist as anything more than a convenient caretaker who happens to live in the same house. Michael's hands were shaking as he picked up the lease agreement. Mom, this is crazy. We're family. We don't need a lease agreement. Apparently we do, I said, because family members don't usually ask each other to give up their personal space without offering any alternative. Family members don't usually make major decisions about someone else's home without consulting them. It's not someone else's home, Jessica said, her voice rising. It's our home, too. We've been living here for 2 years. We've made it our home. No, I said firmly. You've been living in my home for 2 years. There's a difference. I stood up, smoothing my sweater and gathering my composure. The lease terms are fair. Market rate for a 3-bedroom house in this neighborhood. Utilities included. You have 2 weeks to decide whether you want to sign it or make other arrangements. Other arrangements? Michael's voice cracked. Mom, where are we supposed to go? Jessica's pregnant. We can't just move out. You can do whatever you think is best for your family, I said. But you can't continue to live here rent-free while treating me like a guest in my own home. I walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. I'll be spending the day at the library and then having dinner with Patricia Hendricks. We have some additional paperwork to review. I'll be back this evening. I left them sitting at the kitchen table, their breakfast growing cold between them, their faces reflecting the shock of realizing that their comfortable assumptions about their place in the world had just been shattered. The library was quiet and peaceful, a refugee I had always turned to when I needed to think. I spent the afternoon reading and making notes, planning the changes I wanted to make to the house regardless of what Michael and Jessica decided to do. If they stayed, the guest room would remain mine. I would install a lock on the door, make it clear that it was off-limits to everyone but me. I would reclaim the space that had been my sanctuary, make it even more personal and private than it had been before. If they left, I would convert one of the other bedrooms into a proper guest room, keeping the current one as my private retreat. I would redecorate, maybe take up painting again, create a space that reflected who I was becoming, rather than who I had been. Either way, I would no longer be invisible in my own home. I met Patricia for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown, a place where we could talk without being overheard. She listened as I described the morning's events, her expression sympathetic but not surprised. "How do you feel?" she asked when I finished. "Terrified," I said honestly, "and relieved, and guilty, and proud, all at the same time. That sounds about right," she said with a smile. "You've just taken back control of your life. It's natural to feel conflicted about it." "What if they leave?" I asked. "What if I've just destroyed my relationship with my son over a room?" "Then you'll know where you really stood with him," Patricia said gently. "And you'll still have your home, your independence, and your self-respect." I thought about that as I drove home, the streets quiet in the early evening darkness. The house was lit from within, warm and inviting, but I felt like a stranger approaching it. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. Michael was waiting for me in the living room, the lease agreement spread out on the coffee table in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mixture of hurt and confusion. "Mom," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "Of course," I said, settling into my favorite chair across from him. "Where's Jessica?" "Upstairs. She's upset." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood. "She's been crying all afternoon." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. "I'm sorry she's upset, but this needed to be done." "Did it?" Michael's voice was raw. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening here. Yesterday everything was fine, and today you're treating us like strangers. Yesterday, everything was not fine, I said firmly. Yesterday, you told me I needed to give up my personal space for your convenience, and you both acted like my feelings about it didn't matter. It's one room, Mom. One room in a house with 4 bedrooms. It's my room, I said. The room where I raised you, where I work, where I keep my things. It's not just space, Michael. It's my life. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the lease agreement. This rent, he said finally. It's a lot of money. It's fair market value, I said. You can check with any real estate agent in the area. We can't afford this, he said quietly. Not with the baby coming. Jessica's going to take 3 months of maternity leave, and we've been saving for the nursery furniture and all the things we'll need. Then you'll need to make some decisions, I said, though my heart was breaking at the defeated look on his face. Is this really what you want? He asked. Do you really want us to leave? I considered the question carefully. I want you to want to stay, I said finally. I want you to value our relationship enough to treat me with respect. I want you to see me as a person, not just as a convenient babysitter and housekeeper. That's not fair, he said. We don't treat you like a housekeeper, don't you? I asked. When was the last time you asked me about my day? When was the last time you inquired about my work, my friends, my interests? When was the last time you treated me like someone whose opinions and feelings mattered? Michael's silence was answer enough. I raised you to be a good man, I continued. And you are a good man. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a whole person. I became just Mom, the woman who took care of things, who made everything easier for you. That's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? You moved in here 2 years ago because it was convenient and economical. You've made decisions about my home without consulting me. You've assumed that I would be available to babysit whenever you needed me, without ever asking if that's what I wanted. We never asked you to babysit, he protested. You didn't have to ask, I said. It was just assumed. The same way it was assumed that I would give up my room for your baby. The same way it's assumed that I exist primarily to make your life easier. The truth of it hung between us like a physical presence. Michael's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to run to me for comfort. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't, I said, my voice gentling. But that's what happened. And it needs to change. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the magnitude of what had been said. Finally, Michael picked up the lease agreement and studied it again. If we sign this, he said slowly, if we agree to pay rent, can we work things out? Can we find a way to make this work for everyone? We can try, I said. But things have to change, Michael. Real change, not just temporary adjustments. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. I mean that I want to be treated as an equal partner in this household. I want my space and my privacy respected. I want to be consulted about major decisions that affect the house. And I want to be seen as a person with my own life and interests. Not just as your mother. Michael nodded slowly. And the guest room stays mine, I said firmly. You can use the small room for the nursery, or you can clean out the storage room. But my space is my space. The storage room is full of junk, he said. Then you'll need to clean it out, I said, or make other arrangements. He sighed, a sound that seemed to come from his soul. Jessica's not going to like this. Jessica will need to adjust, I said. Just as you will. Just as I have been adjusting for 2 years. Michael stood up, the lease agreement in his hands. I need to talk to her. We need to figure out what we're going to do. Take your time, I said. You have 2 weeks. He paused at the bottom of the stairs. Mom, are we going to be okay? Are we going to get through this? I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, and I saw both the child he had been and the father he was about to become. That depends on you, I said. On both of you. He nodded and went upstairs, leaving me alone with the weight of what I had done and the uncertainty of what would come next. The next few days passed in a strange state of suspended animation. Michael and Jessica went about their daily routines, but there was a tension in the house that hadn't been there before. They spoke to me politely, but there was a distance that felt deliberate and uncomfortable. I found myself spending more time away from the house, taking long walks through the neighborhood, visiting the library, even going to matinee movies by myself. I was reclaiming my independence, but it felt lonely in a way I hadn't expected. On Wednesday evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Jessica approached me. She looked tired, her face pale, and her eyes red-rimmed. "Margaret," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I set down my knife and turned to face her. "Of course." She sat down heavily at the kitchen table, her hands folded over her belly. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "Do you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I think so. I think I've been taking advantage of your kindness without realizing it." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never had a mother who cared about me the way you care about Michael. My mom was distant, critical. I always felt like I was disappointing her." I sat down across from her, my heart softening despite myself. "I'm sorry to hear that. When Michael and I got married, and you welcomed me into your home, I thought it was wonderful. I thought this was what having a real family felt like. But I think I got confused about the boundaries. I started thinking of this as my home, instead of understanding that it was your home, and you were sharing it with us. That's a very mature way to look at it," I said. "I talked to my therapist about it," she continued. "She helped me understand that I was recreating some of the patterns from my childhood, where I assumed other people would take care of me, without me having to ask or give anything back." I nodded, impressed by her insight. "That takes courage to recognize. I want to sign the lease," she said suddenly. "I want us to pay rent and be proper tenants. I want to earn the right to live here instead of just assuming it." "What does Michael think about that?" "He's scared," she admitted. "He's scared that paying rent means we'll never be able to save enough to buy our own place. He's scared that this is the beginning of the end of our relationship with you." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think it's the beginning of something better," she said. "I think it's the start of us having a real relationship based on mutual respect instead of just convenience." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I hope you're right. I know the guest room is important to you," she said, "and I understand now that we can't just take it. But the storage room is really small, and I'm worried about how we'll fit everything the baby needs." "We'll figure it out," I said. "Maybe we can reorganize some things, make better use of the space. I'm not unreasonable, Jessica. I just want to be treated like a person whose feelings matter. They do matter," she said emphatically. "I can see that now. I got so caught up in the excitement of preparing for the baby that I forgot to consider how our decisions affected you. That evening, the three of us sat down together and signed the lease agreement. Michael was still reluctant, but he seemed to understand that this was necessary for our relationship to move forward. "There's something else we need to discuss," I said after the documents were signed. "If you're going to be paying rent, then we need to establish some ground rules about how the household works." "What kind of ground rules?" Michael asked. "Well, for instance, I won't be cooking for you every night anymore. We'll need to work out a schedule for meal preparation and cleanup, and I won't be doing your laundry or cleaning your rooms. You're adults, and you can take care of yourselves." Jessica nodded. "That's fair. We should have been doing that all along. I also want to establish some boundaries about my private space, I continued. The guest room is off limits unless you're invited. I may have friends over occasionally, and I don't want to feel like I need to ask permission or explain myself. Friends? Michael looked surprised. What friends? I have a life outside of this house, Michael, I said gently. I have book club, and I've been thinking about joining a hiking group. I might even start dating again. The look of shock on his face was almost comical. Dating? Mom, you're 57 years old. Exactly. I'm 57, not 97. I'm not dead, sweetheart. Jessica laughed, the first genuine laugh I had heard from her in days. Good for you, Margaret. You deserve to be happy. Over the following weeks, we settled into a new rhythm. Michael and Jessica paid their first month's rent, and I used the money to hire a housekeeper to come every other week. I also enrolled in a pottery class and bought myself a new dress for the first time in 2 years. The storage room project became a family effort. We spent a weekend going through decades of accumulated belongings, sorting and organizing and donating. In the process, we found boxes of Michael's childhood artwork, photo albums from family vacations, and letters I had written to my parents during his early years. Listen to this, Jessica said, reading from a letter I had written when Michael was 6 months old. He rolled over today for the first time. I was so excited I called everyone I know. I feel like I'm documenting history, watching this perfect little person discover the world. Michael looked up from the box he was sorting through. You kept all of this? Every report card, every drawing, every school photo, I said. You were my whole world for so long. I wanted to remember everything. I never knew, he said quietly. I never realized how much you sacrificed for me. It wasn't sacrifice, I said. It was love. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself in being your mother. I forgot that I was also Margaret, a person with her own dreams and needs. By the end of the weekend, we had transformed the storage room into a cozy nursery. It was small, but it was filled with love and anticipation. Jessica had chosen a theme of woodland animals, and we had found a beautiful rocking chair at an antique store that I had refinished myself. It's perfect, Jessica said, standing in the doorway with her hands on her belly. It's exactly what I wanted. The baby arrived on a snowy February morning, 6 weeks ahead of schedule. I was in my pottery class when Michael called, his voice shaking with excitement and terror. Mom, it's happening. Jessica's in labor. Can you meet us at the hospital? I arrived at the hospital to find Michael pacing the waiting room, his hair disheveled and his shirt wrinkled. How is she? I asked. Scared, he said honestly. We both are. It's too early. What if something's wrong? I took his hands in mine, feeling the tremor of fear that ran through him. Everything's going to be fine, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. 8 hours later, Emma Rose was born, weighing 4 pounds and 2 ounces. She was tiny and perfect, with a full head of dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. When the nurse placed her in my arms, I felt my heart expand in ways I had forgotten were possible. She's beautiful, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. She looks like you, Jessica said from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. She has your eyes. I looked down at my granddaughter, this miracle who had changed everything, and I realized that the changes I had made in my life hadn't been about pushing my family away. They had been about making room for new kinds of love, new ways of being together. The first few weeks after Emma's birth were challenging. She was small and needed frequent feeding, and Jessica was recovering from a difficult delivery. Michael threw himself into caring for both of them, with a dedication that reminded me of the determined little boy he had once been. I found myself helping more than I had planned, but it felt different this time. I was helping because I wanted to, because I was invited to, not because it was expected or assumed. "I don't know what we would have done without you," Jessica said one evening, as I rocked Emma to sleep in the nursery. "You've been amazing. You would have figured it out," I said, adjusting the tiny blanket around Emma's sleeping form. "Parents always do. But it's been so much better having you here," she continued. "Having your experience, your calm presence. I feel like I'm learning how to be a mother by watching you be a grandmother." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the baby in my arms. "Being a grandmother is different from being a mother," I said. "I get to love her completely, without carrying all the worry and responsibility. It's a gift." Michael appeared in the doorway, his face soft with exhaustion and contentment. "She's finally asleep?" "Finally," I said, carefully placing Emma in her crib. The nursery had become a haven of soft colors and gentle sounds, a space that felt separate from the rest of the house in the best possible way. "Mom," Michael said as we tiptoed out of the room, "I want to thank you for everything, for the way you handled all of this, for making us grow up. You were already grown up," I said. "You just needed to remember it." "I was taking you for granted," he said. "I was treating you like you existed, just to make my life easier." "That wasn't fair." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. But it wasn't entirely your fault either. I enabled it by not setting boundaries, by not asserting my own needs." We stood in the hallway speaking in whispers to avoid waking the baby. The house around us was quiet and peaceful, but it felt different now. It felt like a home shared by equals, rather than a place where one person gave and others took. "I've been thinking," Michael said, "about the future, about what we want to do long term." "Oh," I said, curious. "We want to stay," he said. "If you'll have us. We want to buy the house from you, make it officially ours, but with you as a partner. Equal ownership, equal say in decisions." I was quiet for a moment, considering. "What brought this on?" "A lot of things," he said. "Partly it's practical. We love this house, this neighborhood. Emma's room is perfect for her, and we've put down roots here. But mostly it's because I've realized that I don't want to lose what we've built over these past few months." "What have we built?" "A real relationship," he said. "One based on mutual respect and genuine care for each other. I don't want to go back to the way things were, but I also don't want to lose the closeness we have now." I thought about his proposal as I got ready for bed that night. The idea of sharing ownership of the house with Michael and Jessica felt both terrifying and exciting. It would mean giving up some of my independence, but it would also mean formalizing the partnership we had been building. The next morning, I called Patricia to discuss the legal implications. She listened carefully as I explained Michael's proposal, asking questions and taking notes. "It's certainly possible," she said. "We could structure it so that you retain a controlling interest, or we could make it a true partnership. There are tax implications to consider, and we'd need to be clear about what happens if someone wants to sell their share." "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "I think you should do what feels right to you," she said. "You've spent the last 6 months reclaiming your independence and establishing your worth. If sharing ownership feels like a natural next step, then it probably is. If it feels like backsliding, then it probably is that too." I spent the weekend thinking about it, watching Michael and Jessica navigate their new roles as parents. They had grown so much over the past few months, not just as individuals but as a couple. They consulted each other on decisions, shared household responsibilities, and treated me as a valued member of the family, rather than a convenient service provider. Emma was a constant source of joy and wonder. She was gaining weight steadily, and had developed a personality that was entirely her own. She was curious and alert, with a penetrating gaze that seemed to see everything. When she looked at me, I felt like she was seeing straight into my soul. "She knows you're her grandmother," Jessica said one afternoon, as we watched Emma track my movements across the room. She lights up when she sees you. She's just responding to familiar faces, I said, though I hoped Jessica was right. No, it's more than that, Jessica insisted. She knows you're special. She knows your family. Family. The word had taken on new meaning over the past few months. It wasn't just about blood relations or shared DNA. It was about choice, about commitment, about the daily decision to love and support each other, even when it was difficult. On Sunday evening, I sat down with Michael and Jessica to discuss their proposal. Emma was sleeping in her carrier on the floor between us, occasionally making the small sounds that newborns make. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began. "About buying the house together." "And?" Michael asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I think it could work," I said. "But I have some conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Jessica asked. "First, I want to retain a controlling interest, 51% to your 49%. I'm older. I've been here longer. And I want to make sure that if we ever disagree about something major, there's a way to resolve it." Michael nodded. "That's fair." "Second, I want written agreements about everything. Who's responsible for what expenses, how decisions get made, what happens if someone wants to sell. I don't want any more assumptions or misunderstandings." "Absolutely," Jessica said. "We want everything to be clear and fair." "And third," I continued, "I want to maintain my independence. I'm not going to be your live-in babysitter or housekeeper. I'm happy to help with Emma, but as her grandmother, not as free childcare." "We wouldn't expect that," Michael said quickly. "Good," I said, "because I have a life to live too. I'm dating someone, actually. His name is Robert, and he's in my pottery class. We're taking things slowly, but I want you to know that my life isn't going to revolve around this house or this family anymore." The look of surprise on their faces was almost comical. "You're dating?" Jessica asked. "That's wonderful. When do we get to meet him?" "When and if I decide you're ready," I said with a smile. "We're still figuring things out ourselves." Over the next few weeks, we worked out the details of the house purchase. Patricia drew up the paperwork, and we had the house appraised to determine a fair price. Michael and Jessica would be buying into the house at current market value, which was significantly more than what I had paid for it 23 years earlier. The process was complicated and sometimes tense. There were disagreements about the appraisal, about the terms of the partnership agreement, about who would pay for what improvements. But we worked through each issue with patience and respect, always keeping in mind that we were building something together rather than fighting over something finite. Robert was patient with my complicated living situation. He was a widower who had raised 3 children of his own, and he understood the delicate balance between independence and family obligation. He was kind and funny, and treated me like a woman rather than just a mother and grandmother. "You're glowing," he said one evening as we walked through the park near his house. "Whatever changes you've made in your life, they're working for you." "I'm learning to take up space," I said, "to exist as a whole person, rather than just in relation to other people." "It suits you," he said, taking my hand. "You're more yourself than anyone I've ever met." Spring arrived with a burst of color and warmth. The maple tree in the front yard was covered in new leaves, and the garden I had planted years ago was coming back to life. Emma was growing and changing every day, her personality emerging in smiles and coos and determined attempts to hold her head up. The house purchase was finalized in April, on a day when the cherry blossoms were at their peak. We signed the papers in Patricia's office, with Emma sleeping in her carrier and Robert waiting in the car outside. "Congratulations," Patricia said as we shook hands. "You're all officially homeowners." "It feels different," Jessica said as we drove home. Even though nothing has really changed, it feels different. Everything has changed, I said. We've changed. The way we relate to each other has changed. The house is just the physical manifestation of that. That evening we celebrated with dinner on the back patio. Robert joined us, and I watched with satisfaction as he and Michael found common ground in their shared love of baseball. Jessica was relaxed and happy, bouncing Emma on her knee and pointing out the flowers in the garden. "This is nice," she said, looking around at all of us. "This feels like family." "It is family," I said. "Just a different kind than what any of us expected." As the sun set and the evening grew cool, we moved inside. Robert helped me clear the dishes while Michael and Jessica put Emma to bed. The house was full of the comfortable sounds of people who belonged together, who had chosen to build a life together. "Thank you," I said to Robert as he dried the last plate. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me," I said. "For treating me like a person worth knowing." "You are worth knowing," he said, pulling me into his arms. "You're worth everything." Later that night, after Robert had gone home and Michael and Jessica had gone to bed, I sat in my guest room, my sanctuary, and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I had been invisible in my own home, forgotten, and taken for granted. Now I was a full partner in a family business, a grandmother to a beautiful baby, and a woman in love. The room around me was exactly as I had always wanted it to be. My sewing machine in one corner, my books and photographs on the shelves, my comfortable chair by the window. But more than that, it was a space that was respected and valued, a place where I could be completely myself. I heard Emma cry softly from the nursery, followed by the sound of Jessica's footsteps in the hallway. The house settled around us, holding us all in its embrace. This was what home felt like, I realized. Not just a place to live, but a place where everyone belonged, where everyone mattered, where love was expressed through respect and consideration rather than just proximity. The next morning I woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. I dressed and went downstairs to find Michael making pancakes while Jessica fed Emma in her high chair. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it took me a moment to remember how fraught things had been just a few months earlier. "Good morning," Michael said, looking up from the stove. "I made extra. I thought you might want some." "That's very thoughtful," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "But I'm having brunch with Robert. We're driving out to that new farmer's market in Millbrook." "That sounds fun," Jessica said. "Will you pick up some of those tomatoes we liked last week? I'll pay you back?" "Of course," I said, settling into my chair to finish my coffee. "What are your plans for the day?" "We're going to start painting the living room," Michael said. "That color we picked out last week. Do you want to help?" "I'd love to," I said. "But I promised Robert I'd help him plant his vegetable garden this afternoon. Maybe tomorrow?" "Tomorrow works," Jessica said. "We're in no hurry." I finished my coffee and gathered my purse and keys. As I headed toward the door, Michael called out to me. "Mom, have a good time today. You deserve it." I smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle around me like a comfortable blanket. "Thank you, sweetheart. I intend to." The drive to Millbrook was beautiful, the countryside green and lush with spring growth. Robert and I talked easily about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as naturally as the winding road. "I've been thinking," he said as we walked through the market, our arms full of fresh produce and flowers, "about us, about where this is going." "Oh," I said, my heart skipping a beat. "I know we said we'd take things slowly," he continued, "and I don't want to rush you. But I'm falling in love with you, Margaret. I want you to know that." I stopped walking, setting down my basket of vegetables. "I'm falling in love with you too," I said. "It scares me a little." "Why?" he asked gently. Because I've spent so much time learning to be independent, I said. I'm afraid of losing myself again. You won't lose yourself with me, he said. I fell in love with who you are, not who you might become for me. I want to be part of your life, not your whole life. That evening I sat on the back patio with a glass of wine, watching the sun set behind the trees. Michael and Jessica were inside, putting Emma to bed and tidying up after dinner. The house glowed with warm light, and I could hear the murmur of their voices, the sound of water running in the kitchen sink. This was contentment, I realized. This feeling of being exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who loved and valued me. It had taken me 57 years to find it, but it had been worth the wait. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Thank you for a wonderful day. Sweet dreams. I smiled, typing back. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me. Good night. As I prepared to go inside, I took one last look around the yard. The garden was thriving, the grass was green and thick, and the maple tree stood tall and strong, its branches reaching toward the darkening sky. Everything was exactly as it should be. I had reclaimed my space, my independence, my sense of self. I had learned to set boundaries and demand respect. I had found love again, both romantic and familial. And I had discovered that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to be invisible. The guest room was still mine. But more than that, I was still mine. And that, I realized, was the most important victory of all. The house settled around us as we prepared for sleep, holding us all in its embrace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. I climbed the stairs to my sanctuary, my space, my room. As I turned off the light and settled into bed, I heard Emma's soft breathing through the monitor on Jessica's nightstand, Michael's gentle snoring from the master bedroom, and the quiet sounds of a house full of people who belonged together. This was home. This was family. This was the life I had built by refusing to accept less than I deserved. And it was just the beginning.